good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Pottstown, a home of liberal religion. I'm the Reverend Kerry Mueller, co-minister here with the Reverend Dave Hunter. And I'm so glad to see each rare and precious person here this morning. Everyone is welcome here. Whatever your beliefs, your doubts, we welcome you. We welcome those of you who are most uplifted by reason and those who are people of the heart. Whatever your ancestry, we welcome you and rejoice to share our religious home with you. Whomever you love, we are glad to share this time together. Welcome. Are there announcements this morning? Announcement?
The mic needs to be turned on, that's my announcement.
The mic is not on? Now the mic is on, and all is well. If there are no further announcements, I will ring the chimes. And who is the designated chalice lighter this morning? Emily is always reliable. Thank you. The words are from Dawn Sky Cooley. We light our chalice this morning, grateful for the love that we experience in this beloved community. May the flame light the way for all who seek such abundance. We will have a virtual flame this morning. From Marilyn Sewell, come into the circle of love and justice, come into the community where we can dream and believe in those dreams. Come into this holy space where we remember who we are and how we want to live. Come now, let us worship together. Our opening hymn, which unfortunately we cannot sing, but we can think of the words, is number 360, Here We Have Gathered. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to invite the children to come forward for a special time for all ages. And I need 3 actors this morning. It was my intention to let the kids decide whether they wanted to be actors or audience, but I need 3, so that we need at least 1 adult actor. It is a simple acting job, and the story has in it the directions. So, we have 3 parts. And I've made some very sophisticated props. We have the sun. Who would like to be the sun? You'll do it, good. And the north wind. Who would like to be the north wind? None of the children are volunteering, so I'm going to volunteer an adult. Alan, looks like you're the north wind. And we have a job for an old traveler. Okay, you can be the old traveler and you can wrap yourself up in that because it's cold out. Good. Thank you. And stay in the middle. So it's just a shawl. It won't stay on without help. The north wind and the sun had a quarrel about which one of them was stronger. Okay, why don't you wave those out so that the people can see these wonderful props that I've made for you. Good. While they were disputing with much heat and bluster, a traveler came along, wrapped in a cloak. Here's the traveler. Oh, good, good. Let us agree, said the sun, that he is the stronger who can strip the traveler of his cloak. Very well, growled the north wind, and at once sent a cold, howling blast towards the traveler. Because of COVID, there's no actual blowing, but you can... Good, good. Okay. With the first gust of wind, the ends of the cloak whipped around the traveler's body, but she immediately wrapped it closely around her, and the harder the wind blew, the tighter she held it to her. The north wind tore angrily at the cloak, but all his efforts were in vain. Then the sun began to shine. At first, her beams were gentle, and in the pleasant warmth after the bitter cold of the north wind, the traveler unfastened the cloak and let it hang loosely from his shoulders. The sun's rays grew warmer and warmer, and the traveler mopped her brow. And at last, she became so heated that she pulled off the cloak and, to escape the blazing sunshine, threw herself down in the welcome shade of a tree by the roadside. Gentleness and persuasion win over force and bluster every time. Thus endeth the lesson in the time for all ages. Thank you very much, you 3 actors. You may return to your seats. And in the normal times, thank you very much. You can keep those for the time being. In normal times, we would pass a basket at this point so that you can make your donations, but the basket and the donation button right now await your generosity. But I have some words, again, from the sun, and these are words from the Persian poet Hafez. Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Look what happens with a love like that. It lights up the whole sky. We have an opportunity to light up the sky with our love, and as I say, the donation basket awaits. Every life is touched by joy. Every life has its share of sorrows. In this time together, we take a few moments to share our joys and sorrows, our hopes and concerns. And if you would like to share, come forward and share a few words with us, and please tell us your name. Come forward then, please, Miss Emily.
Enjoy the brick sound in later so we can have a rich flaming shower.
Oh, good. Is to find a working candle.
It works.
Yes.
It works.
Great. Are there other joys or sorrows this morning? John, are you coming forward to share something?
John. As I was listening to something on NPR this morning, I think it was Radio Lab or some such, great story about some folks in boats who came upon a whale, which was 50 feet long and 50 tons, humpback whale, female, that was entangled in many ropes from lobster traps, about 50 or about 30 of them, and she was bound up across her head, her fins, her tail. Dire straits because she really couldn't breathe well, she couldn't function well. So they got in there, they took their knives, and bit by bit freed the whale entirely. The whale seemed to disappear, and then shortly after, they all found this big whale coming up from under them, and they were fearful they were about to be annihilated. The whale came up to each of the people. There were 3 or 4 in the water and 2 boats. The whale came up to each person, literally looked them in the eye, which is the size of a grapefruit, they tell me, and stared at each of them, in a sense, communicating, we presume, thanks. But it was a unique event because the whale literally went to each person, got a couple of inches away, looked at them with the eye not moving, and it didn't jiggle, and then it went to the boat and looked at the boat or the people in the boats, and then it seemed to take off eventually. It seemed to be reluctant to leave. So, our 7th principle, demonstration of the interconnected web of which we all are all part. It warms my heart as we have stories of our connection to other species.
Thank you, John.
I have a joy. It just happened now when John gave us this story of the whale, and I can add to it. I have a little rescue, a little cattle dog that has been getting progressively more and more aggressive and very difficult. And I was getting to the point where I couldn't keep him. And I know that nobody else would want him, so he would probably have to be put down. But we visited a behaviorist, a dog behaviorist, on Friday with him, and she spent 2 hours watching him with us, and just sort of opened the skies for us and showed us what he was thinking, probably, and how to solve the problem, and talk about interspecies communication, and helping. For him, it's life-changing, and it's just a delight.
Lovely.
Hello, I'm Dave, and I have the joy, 41 years of marriage to Kerry. I don't think we need a behaviorist. Who knows tomorrow?
He has not been getting more aggressive.
I'm Cindy. I have a joy, a sorrow, and a concern, I guess a little bit of everything. My sister's very ill in the hospital, not with COVID, we're all vaccinated, but we're looking at surgery down the road, and it's pretty scary. She's out in Indiana. My other joy / sorrow is that I've decided to downsize and move back where I came from, and I found the perfect condo out there, like second day, and they've accepted my offer, and my house has gone up for sale. On the way things are going, I expect it's going to go very fast. And the reason I'm saying this is because I'm downsizing. I have furniture, a lot of kids' toys, a lot of things like that in really good condition. If anybody's interested, please let me know. They're all free. Okay? Thank you.
Let us remember that we are touched by the cares and the joys of every human being, those we hear about and those unknown to us, which may be too new and tender to share. Some years ago, I sent off to the Church of the Larger Fellowship a meditation I had written, and then I promptly forgot it. Well, recently they published it, and I saw it again. So I'm going to share it with you tonight or this morning, but I think it's actually would have been better yesterday because it refers to perfect weather. And yesterday's day was gloriously beautiful. Dave and I did a wedding together, and that was quite nice. And today we have fog and gloom, but that has its own perfection. Spirit of life, we are joined together today in a moment of gratitude for a perfect fall day, for a last blaze of sunshine in the sapphire sky before the rain and snow, for gold and crimson leaves before we are mired in piles of slush, for the moment of peace and contemplation in which to appreciate this rare beauty. This moment of perfection sharpens our love for an imperfect world. We are reminded of the many people who are burdened by hunger and pain, by sorrow and anxiety, by violence and loss. We pause this morning, this moment, to share and care our concern for the people of Haiti who are still struggling with an earthquake and a storm, the people of Afghanistan scattered about the world and still at home suffering, and all the people in the world who are hungry and frightened and oppressed. May they find comfort and peace. May their burdens be lifted from them. May we find it in ourselves today to work to a better world. We are energized by the beauty of this season. May we make use of that energy to take part in the lifting of burdens. May our gratitude in the care of others, both near and far. May we find ways. And now we'll have a moment of silence and then the meditation hymn. Thank you. An African proverb says that when two antelopes run side by side, they blow the dust from one another's eyes. I love this proverb the moment I heard it. I love the image of two magnificent animals thundering along, raising a blinding dust and tenderly caring for one another by blowing the dust from each other's eyes. It's a great symbol of the value of community. Together, we kick up a lot of dust, but our care for each other helps our community to thrive. I wish I'd had this proverb with me nearly 2 decades ago in Westminster, Maryland, when I had an unpleasant run-in with a fundamentalist minister who blocked my membership from the local ministerium. Perhaps it would have helped me to think things through a little differently and have a different response, or perhaps not. I did have with me an excellent sentence that didn't do me any good just then, but has stayed with me ever since. I had picked it up from my all-time favorite radio talk show host in WAMU in Washington. Now, Derek McGinty is about as different from me demographically as you could imagine. He's a different race, a different gender, a different generation. He's young enough to be my son. But from his first, earliest, slightly tentative weeks, he did a fine job as host. His show never felt like an interview, but always like a conversation. And he was very adept at dealing with angry or cranky callers and letting them have their say, as long as they were civil, and never getting rattled by them or allowing them to rant. Now, the details of this particular conversation are hazy now, but it was a controversial topic, I believe, about race. Someone called in to complain that someone else had said something offensive. And I certainly agreed that I didn't like what the first caller had said, but they had spoken in the civil manner that Derek required and that he always inspired. I don't imagine that Derek had liked it either, whatever it was, something that could be construed as racist, no doubt. Derek answered the complaining caller sympathetically, and then he added, "But you don't have the right not to be offended." Meaning, if you participate in a public forum, people will say things you don't like. And you don't have the right to expect that you will never hear anything that offends you. You don't have the right not to be offended. That stayed with me. If I want to be engaged in the dialogue, I must be prepared to engage, to hear offensive things and stay with the person. This is a piece of tolerance. Well, I wasn't fully prepared to engage that day in Westminster when my fundamentalist colleague was there. It was kind of the climax of a long process that began when I first showed up at a ministerium meeting. That first day, I didn't see the shocked glances, and I didn't anticipate their determined effort to keep me out. At my next visit, I began to understand. During the devotions at the beginning of the meeting, I bowed my head demurely, and I glanced down at the agenda. There was my name. I was a problem. I wondered if they were hoping to burn me at the stake. A couple of them had been assigned to create a statement of faith that was designed purely to keep me out. Things like Trinity and virgin birth and permanent hell and so on. But no one outside of that little assigned group was willing to sign it. So they were stumped. They created an executive subcommittee to find a solution. Discussion, the president, Matt I'll call him, spoke passionately about their 75th anniversary the previous spring when they had a big parade in town, and how awful it would be if some gay or lesbian organization tried to get into their parade. I smiled sweetly, and I thought to myself, let me in, and it will be sooner rather than later. And after several months of this subcommittee working, they called me back. The long and the short of it was that they had always been a Christian organization, and they couldn't let in a non-Christian, and that was me. But since they were Christians, they were required to be hospitable, so I could attend as a guest. I thanked them, and I began attending. Then one day, Matt summoned me to his office. He wasn't serving a church, but he had a small business. Like St. Paul, his was a tent maker ministry. He remodeled kitchens for a living. And there he sat at his big desk, which was on sort of a platform about this high, waving a large and somewhat menacing letter opener. It was actually considerably larger than this one, but he kept waving it at me. And he said, "This won't do, Mrs. Mueller, this won't do." Now, he always refused to acknowledge my status as a minister. I decided not to help him. I didn't point out that Mrs. Mueller was my late mother. I'm either Kerry, or Rev Mueller, or Ms. Mueller, or even in a pinch, Miss Mueller. I guess he didn't know about Dave, because otherwise he would have just called me Mrs. Hunter. I sat quietly. "Didn't you go to some sort of seminary?" he demanded. "Oh yes," I said. "Wesley Seminary is one of the finest Methodist seminaries." "Well, didn't they teach you about how Christ died on the cross for you?" "This won't do." I sat quietly. "Reverend Susan told me that you Unitarian Universalists, you Universalist Unitarians, were infiltrating the Christian seminaries and watering them down. I remembered that a professor had told me at graduation that Wesley didn't acknowledge valedictorians, but that I had the highest grade point average in the class. So much for watering down. I sat quietly, letting him rant. Why would you want to go to a meeting where people didn't want you? I knew that those who didn't want me were perhaps a half a dozen out of 50 or more. Another half a dozen were furious and embarrassed by how the others were treating me. Most were just wishing that the whole thing would go away. I need to be at those meetings to help serve my church better and to help them to serve the community better. Are we welcome to give money to Shepherd Staff? Shepherd Staff was a service organization that had been founded by the ministerium. Oh yes. How about giving the annual 4th of July picnic for the homeless? Is it okay that we host that picnic at the Shepherd Staff building? Oh yes. But this won't do. This won't do. This won't do. I declined to respond. Eventually, he felt compelled to tell me what this was. It wouldn't do. My name was getting into the minutes of the meeting. I asked him if that compromised his status as a Christian. Yes, he answered. I suggested he instruct the secretary to list me as a guest. I went on to inquire if, as a guest, I could speak. Yes. For providing refreshments and offering devotions. No, you were a guest. I suspected he might have liked my muffins, but was a little bit worried about my prayers. And well, he might be. Well, that pretty much did it. I had backed him down. We were at the status quo, and I hadn't budged. When a reporter got a hold of the story, I held the high ground, and I did not whine, but I merely said that some folks thought that the ministerium should be a purely Christian organization. The resulting article in the local paper brought in several new members to our congregation. Some folks figured that if the fundamentalists didn't like our church, we must be okay. And I have to confess that I was secretly pleased when the people who followed me in that congregation turned out to be gay and vocal about it. And that got into the local paper as well. I've wondered since how they would have the nearest synagogue and tried to join, or what happened after the Hindu temple was built. In that interaction with Matt, I had managed to stay civil, just. I exhibited the bare minimum of tolerance, but there was plenty of dust as Matt and I bounded along together like two antelopes. Had we lovingly blown the dust from one another's eyes? I'm afraid not. Fortunately, Matt and I did not need to engage in theological or other discussions in any prolonged or intimate way. Our connection to each other was pretty tenuous within the mutual community. But in UU congregations, we are connected much more deeply. We need a deeper kind of tolerance, the kind that engages and celebrates the other. We are always faced with the challenge of blowing the dust from one another's eyes. We care for one another. We hear one another's views. We don't always We are a community of faith. This sermon is much too long, so I'm skipping some pages. But in all of that, UUs and other members of society, all of us, are now facing a much sharper challenge of tolerance. And our old Unitarian Universalist watchwords that I grew up with long before the principles and purposes, freedom, reason, and tolerance, our long practice of sharing community with people whom we disagree, these give us a special responsibility. Our country is hard along political, swirling from things like economic and security policy in a pandemic and existential threats like science and health, and deeply philosophical issues like the value of democracy or the humanity of people who are different. The divide is everywhere, it is a chasm, and it threatens civil society, public health, and the future of the planet. This divide is unsustainable. I, of course, have been especially concerned about vaccine refusal on the right because it is deadly, not only to those who remain unvaccinated, but because it gives the virus a greater chance to mutate into something beyond imagination. And then I recently heard a vaccine conspiracy claim. It didn't rise anywhere near the level of theory, it was just a claim. But it was so outrageous, so irrational, so convoluted that it brought me up short. I had to look it up to get the words right. So here it is, as reported by Connor Friederhoff in The Atlantic. And the headline is, "The Conservatives Who'd Rather Die Than Not Own the Libs." And underneath it says, "Rarely has so significant a faction in American politics behaved in a way that so directly claims the life of its own supporters." Here's the bit. In John Nolte's account, however, a conspiracy of evil leftist elites are to blame for vaccine skepticism on the right. I sincerely believe the organized left is doing everything in its power to convince Trump supporters not to get the life-saving Trump vaccine, Nolte writes. They are putting unvaccinated Trump supporters in an impossible position, he insists, where they can either not get the life-saving vaccine or they can feel like cucks for caving into the ugliest, smuggest bullies in the world. They can't do what is good for themselves and their families because it's liberal, good for everybody else too. This seemed to me, when I thought about it, less like a strategic accusation and more like a desperate cry for help. They feel like they've been backed into a corner and they're thrashing around looking for a way out. How can we work towards healing the division and reestablish trust? Trust in public health. And right, that we really must be to each other. It's hopeless. Nevertheless, we persist. I can only turn to our first principles. First comes love. Not the emotion that Martin Luther King called sentimental balderdash, but the disciplined acting from conviction. As Universalists, we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. We reject the idea of original sin. Everyone starts out with the possibility of goodness. And though some people seem to just throw that away, we don't just write them off. We hold open the doors of possibility. The people who seem to have succumbed to the cult of irrationality and personality can be seen as hostages to be released, not as enemies to be defeated. For those of us in a position of strength, supported by rationality and science, it is a temptation to just stay in our lane, just overwhelm them with correct information. That is useless at best. This is not a matter of the intellect. It calls for a pastoral approach. A great example is the recent Tyson Foods mandate, the vaccine mandate. It has been very successful, largely because it came with a message of empathy and new benefits, blowing the dust and shining the sun warmly. I recently attended a memorial service at Whitehorse Village for someone I didn't know very well. Nevertheless, I had pretty much dismissed him in my mind on the basis of one remark. In the service, I heard stories about his kindness to many people, his sharing of a wide range of intellectual interests, and his unflinching courage in the face of lifelong suffering from polio. maybe I was just wrong about him. Or maybe that one remark didn't really define the whole of him. I never found out. I failed to hold him in love, at least until the memorial service. I recall Krista Tippett, who was famed for her interviews on spiritual matters, when she gave the Ware lecture at the UU General Assembly. She said that the most important question is always, where does it hurt? Trust will come only from a sense of caring. People need to know that they're cared for. They need to be held in love. They can't listen when a harsh wind is blowing. Curiosity will do more than any amount of correct information. Now, by that, I don't mean that you should either jump into the middle of a scrum of people shouting death threats, such as we have seen all too often at school board meetings about mask mandates, or that you should abandon your own integrity and let racial slurs slide by as if you agreed with them. A universalist love is accountable. I am suggesting that sometimes, under some circumstances, a deflection, a question, a moment of sympathy, walking a careful line between kindness and harsh judgment, these may serve to open a path. Can we do this? Maybe, sometimes, when we feel strong enough. Will it do any good? At a minimum, it will keep us from screaming angry slogans over the abyss and making everything worse. It may help de-escalate the divide. It may give us an opportunity to put a pebble in their shoe, a small pebble of doubt, a little pebble of uncertainty. You never know when they might be able to take out that pebble and consider it carefully. All those years ago when I visited with the fundamentalist minister Matt, mesmerized by his letter opener, I managed a minimum of tolerance. I knew that if I was going to participate in the world at all, I didn't have the right not to be offended. But I hadn't been. I had listened quietly to a bunch of offensive things without yelling and getting upset, but I hadn't fully engaged with him. I knew he was operating out of fear. I knew I was in the stronger position. I was highly chosen by a church to be their minister, a church that stood for everything he didn't believe. He saw my very presence in the community as a threat. Now, I had begun the whole interview with kind of a wild notion that his plan was to kidnap me and forcibly convert me. And I had managed to hold my own. Looked for common ground. I had seen him as other and stranger and not as a person capable of growth and change. I hadn't truly honored his inherent worth. I hadn't taken that further step to blow the dust from his eyes, nor the step of offering to allow him to blow dust from mine. I had failed to hold him in love. Beyond mere tolerance, beyond civility, beyond forbearance, lies a territory where we can sometimes stretch our souls and reach new human depths. May we be willing to take the risks of running side by side with the other magnificent creatures. Shalom, namaste, and blessed be. Our closing hymn is number 131, Love Will Guide Us. in our order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of wisdom, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and in our hands until we are together again. For benediction, we have the words of Rumi. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about ideas, language, or even the phrase each other. Amen.
I was gonna say, as a parent, just approving.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Do you remember